this schedule really shapes up for a playoff run with a 12-team playoff.
Areas that, you need to get from experience, which is just, hey, I need to make quicker decisions.
How do you define success for this team?
National championship.
What's up, y'all? I'm Bud Elliott. This is the Cover 3 College Football Podcast. Today, summer school. We're talking Syracuse. I'm heading to Cuse Nation. That's Mike McAllister. He has done a great job covering Syracuse for a good long while now. Mike, welcome back to the show, man.
Thanks. Appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. So, Fran Brown's first season, an absolute banger. 10 wins. I mean, like, the vibe around the program had to be just pretty immaculate, right?
Yeah, as the season went along, the vibe got better. He made headways right away with the caliber of recruits that he was bringing in, that he was landing, multiple 4-stars. They flirted with a couple of 5-stars that came up and visited, even though they didn't end up getting those guys. And then obviously the big splash with getting a player of the caliber of Kyle McCord. Once you had him with all the other things that were going on, everyone kind of bought in. And so there was a lot of buzz and there was a lot of, questions on how year one would go. How would Fran Brown do as a head coach? He'd never been a head coach before. So there's some questions in terms of time management and substitution patterns and, those types of things that you didn't really know because you hadn't seen him do it before. Some things that were maybe downfalls of the previous regime here. So the fact that he goes through year one, doesn't really have any of those major coaching gaffes. They win 10 games. He goes viral multiple times. The winners get washed thing that caught on. Pretty positive thing from all aspects for Syracuse football.
Syracuse team certainly played hard for him. They were a little more skillful on offense last year than they were on defense. Jeff Nixon is back as the OC, right?
He is, yes.
Okay, so but then you lose Kyle McCord, LaQuint Allen, who was a really good back, Gadsden, who when he was healthy was good, and Trevor Pena. How does this offense look different in 2025? I mean, obviously different guys, but is it going to have to operate differently?
And Jackson Meeks, you also lost him.
Right.
And there's a couple offensive linemen. Savion Washington, for example, is also gone as one of their starting tackles. I think you lost one of your starting guards and your starting center. So there's a lot of rebuild there going on in terms of the offensive line, your weapons, etc. The positive for Syracuse is they've done a pretty good job in recruiting and bringing in transfer portal guys the last couple of years. So they feel like they've got the players to replace those skill position guys. And the running back position, especially, you're going to see Will Nixon and Yassine Willis take over for LaQuint Allen. But the biggest thing is, and what's going to drive this whole thing in terms of offensive approach and everything else, is the quarterback. You've got two options. They brought in 2 transfers in Ricky Collins, who was named the starter after the spring. And then when the spring transfer portal window opened, they were able to get Angeli from Notre Dame. So the fact that you've got those 2 guys here, they're a little bit different. Angeli sort of more mirrors what Kyle McCord is, the pocket passer, can sit back and kind of read the defense and go through his progressions, is going to be comfortable back there. Ricky Collins, not that either of them have a lot of experience, but he's got even less than what Angeli does. At least Angeli's been in some games, some big games, college football playoff games. Ricky Collins has thrown 7 total passes at the collegiate level. That's a lot different than having a guy like Kyle McCord who, had 12 games as a starter under his belt at Ohio State. So it's different. I think Angeli allows you to be more similar to what you were under Kyle McCord, whereas if you have Ricky Collins, yeah, he's got great arm talent, but what separates him as a talent as a quarterback is his ability to be mobile. And so I think you could see some differences in terms of play calling and more designed quarterback runs if he ends up getting the nod.
Does Nixon have much experience with QB run game stuff?
That's the thing. It doesn't seem like it. His prior experience doesn't see that a ton, but we do know that was something that they tried to implement a little bit with Kyle McCord. Fran Brown used to say, I want to see backyard Kyle from when he was a kid a little bit more. But the one thing I've learned about Jeff Nixon is that he's not afraid to change things up and do things that are a little bit different based on the skill set of the players that they have. So it's not just a rigid, this is what we're going to do, and whoever we have, they're going to have to figure out how to do it. I think he's more willing to be a little bit flexible in some of those things.
So you didn't read the taking of Angeli's commitment as, hey, Collins is not the guy. It's just like we need to have another option potentially, and maybe he's better, maybe he's not.
Yeah, I mean, they lost Michael Johnson Jr., who was supposed to be one of the primary backups to the transfer portal, and they wanted to add somebody in there. But at the same time, if they could add somebody with some experience, that would be, beneficial for Syracuse's quarterback room. And, I said this to people as well, because that was the first comment I got from a lot of fans when the news that Angeli was going to visit started being reported, was Syracuse's job is to get the best quarterback that they can right now. They need to add someone to the quarterback room. Their job is to add the best one that they can get. It's not to get someone who's good enough to be a solid backup, but not good enough to replace Ricky Collins so that Ricky Collins' feelings aren't hurt. It's FBS football. It's Power 4 football. You can't worry about that stuff. So can Angeli take the job and win the job? Absolutely, he can. But the good thing is Ricky Collins still has 3 years of eligibility left. So just because Angeli wins the job now doesn't mean that all of a sudden Collins is thrown out the window. It just means he gets another year to sit and develop and work on, the playbook and his skills and all of those things.
More confidence in the offensive line or more confidence in the receiving core, and why?
I have more confidence in the receiving core because they've got guys back who we've seen some things from, whether it's Justice Ross Simmons. I know he was hurt most of last year, but did start to come on towards the end of the year. Darryl Gill had some flashes, had a pretty good bowl game. Those types of guys. And then the young players that they've recruited, the Emmanuel Ross and those type of guys that were 4-star prospects that we saw little glimpses of here and there and had really solid springs. The offensive line, they've got a lot of guys, a lot of new guys. And so that's one position where adding a lot of new to it makes it a much more giant question mark. Usually when you have those good offensive lines, it's a bunch of juniors and seniors and players that have been together for multiple years. And they don't really have that. They've got some upperclassmen that are coming back, but there's so many new pieces. It's just really hard to tell. It's going to be one of the biggest question marks going into next year. So as of now, I would say the wide receiving core.
Is there a receiver pick for, like, if you're playing college fantasy, is there a receiver pick where you're like, all right, I got to have this guy because there's a real good chance he's getting, the vast majority of the touchdowns and like more than half the yards?
Yeah, I would have thought it would have been Pena coming into the season before he entered the portal. I think he was on track to get 100 plus targets this year. But without him there, I think it becomes a little bit more by committee. So it's tougher to find just one guy and say that I think is going to be the guy that if you're playing fantasy, he's the one you want. But if I had to make a pick, I'd go with Justice Ross Simmons. I think he's the safest bet just because we saw flashes of what he could be last year. Fran Brown has spoken very highly of him and what his ability is and said he's doing this at about 60%. Imagine what he's going to be when he's 100. And he went through the entire spring without any injury and is ready to go. The other guy that I would mention is a newcomer in Jonte Cook, because Syracuse does need a replacement for Trevor Pena. Cook is tremendously talented. He was very highly rated as a high school recruit for a reason. He just hasn't put that all together on the field yet. And if you get any type of consistent play at the quarterback position this year, Syracuse has an offense. We know they like to throw the ball.
Yeah.
He could have the potential to put up some numbers and surprise some people.
Completely agree. All right, let's hit a break here. And on the flip side, let's go talk a little Cuse defense.
When you need your sports news all the time,
we've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you. When you need your sports in a snap, find it on CBS Sports HQ, streaming free anywhere you are.
And we're back here on the Cover 3 College Ball Podcast Summer School Edition. It's Syracuse. That's Mike McAllister of Cuse Nation. Mike, defensively, this team was not as good as they were offensively last year. Now, granted, they won 10 games. They were opportunistic. Some of those points they gave up were some pick sixes, like in that Pitt game, I can recall. But still almost 30 points a game allowed. Are there fixes that Sam Carter and his staff have talked about making? How does this defense look different than it was that last year? Are there guys they really need to step up? Just kind of lay it on me there if you can.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting, they were missing Marlo Wax for a chunk of the season. And then when he came back, he wasn't really at 100%. And I think that hurt them, especially in the run game. But, he's so smart and such a leader that I think losing him had a big impact. But there's no question they lost the game to Stanford early in the season when they had Stanford at a 4th and 9 and should have won that game if they get a stop in 4th and 9 and didn't stop basically Stanford's only offensive threat, which was their wide receiver who ended up getting drafted this year. They had Boston College at a 4th down situation where if they get a stop, looks like they're going to be in position to potentially win that game. and they end up giving up a touchdown on a fourth down play. So they were basically 2 defensive stops away from potentially being an 11-win team that was in the discussion of being in the college football playoff, which is crazy to think, but that's really how close they were. So yeah, there's losing a guy like Marlo Wax is not great. You lose a guy like Fidel Diggs, who was your primary pass rusher and basically your only consistent pass rushing threat. That stinks. But what they do have is they've got a bunch of safeties that have played that are coming back. They do have Derek McDonald, who's a guy that I would mention, a linebacker who's been here multiple years and stayed through the coaching change and is someone that the coaching staff trusts quite a bit. And then from a defensive tackle standpoint, they get guys like Tank Wilson back and some others who were hurt last year. And on top of that, they had a guy like Rashard Perry who played a lot last year because of injury. So he got that experience. He's another year into his development. And then they add George Rooks, who has 2 years of starting experience at Boston College along the interior of the defensive line. I think he's another guy to keep an eye on coming in. But there's no question there's going to be some moving pieces. And then from a corner standpoint, one guy I would keep an eye on is Ibn McDaniels. I don't know if he's going to start or not, but he did play last year as a true freshman. And I know the coaching staff is very high on him, and they love corners that have length that are, 6'1", 6'2", 6'3". He certainly falls into that mix. And so he's someone that I could see making a big leap from year 1 to year 2.
I like that. This schedule is challenging for sure, and much more so than I think last year's was. For the the listeners at home, obviously we'll have it on the screen here in post production for the YouTube side. But Tennessee, Clemson, SMU, so a couple playoff teams from last year. Notre Dame, another playoff team from last year. Miami, a team that probably, if it took care of business, which Syracuse is the reason they probably did not make the playoff last year. It was an excellent win they had there. And then kind of the come down is what? Boston College, Georgia Tech, which was salty, UNC, which probably is not worse than last year. Coaching upgrade, I think, with Belichick. Pitt, which is always kind of tough. Duke won, 9 or 10 games last year. So this is a lot more difficult. How do you define success for Syracuse in 2025?
Well, Fran Brown's not going to agree with me. His answer is going to be, 13-0 or 12-0, whatever it is, in the playoff and in the ACC championship game. That's what his expectations are going into the season. That's what the team expects. They expect to win all those games, even though you look on paper and, like you said, you mentioned all of those games. None of those are at home of their big, tough games, right? The playoff teams and Miami, et cetera. Duke and North Carolina, you get at home. But again, those are kind of the next rung down from the really toughest games on the schedule. All of those are away from home. And that makes it much more challenging, especially when you're going through a transition along the offensive line, at quarterback, et cetera. So for me personally, if Syracuse figures out a way to go 6-6, 7-5, get to a bowl game, and they're competitive in those games against those upper echelon teams, not losing 56-3 in all of them, right? Then I think you consider that a pretty good year, considering most view this as kind of a transition year in order to get your consistency at those positions.
I think there's an interesting dynamic to this. And we've seen this in the ACC a couple times where, I think I would point to Scott Satterfield at Louisville, right? Hit the ground running in year 1. I really don't think year 2 was materially that much worse of a team than he had in year 1, but the schedule was much more difficult. He had bad close game luck in year 2 and good close game luck in year 1. So it looked like a backslide. And in the win column, it obviously was, but is the quality of the team really that much worse? Not so much. I mean, hell, we've seen some, back when I was doing the team side stuff, I thought that 2011 Florida State would have wiped the floor with 2010 Florida State. And the schedule was just much more difficult, and they had some close game losses. I'm curious, if they, if they do make a bowl, but 6-6, 7-5, as you said, I feel like I still have confidence in Fran Brown to sell that. He's a really good ambassador for this program.
He is. And I think because of what fans have experienced in the past, where you think about the last time they had won 10 games, they didn't go to a bowl game the next year. I think they won 4 games, 5 games, whatever it was. And then the year, a year or two after that, they won 1 in the COVID year, right? So, 2 years after winning 10 games, you're winning 1. That's the type of thing you need to prevent. If Syracuse goes 6-6, 7-5, whatever it is, and then the year after that they're up to 8-9 wins again, I think everyone still feels pretty good. And especially, I think part of it is how you get to that 6-6 and 7-5. If you get there and you win one of these games, let's say they beat Tennessee in week 1 or week 0, whatever it is, and you start the season 3-0, you lose a close game to Clemson. A few weeks later, you lose a close game at SMU. You win a bunch of your home games, and you end up at like 7-5, but you've been competitive the entire season. You've got that big marquee win against Tennessee under your belt. Given what you've lost to the NFL and to the transfer portal, I think most Syracuse fans would say, yeah, I'm still all in on the trajectory of this program, because this is the floor now. And this used to be basically the ceiling outside of a really random, crazy year. And I think most Syracuse fans would take a 6-6, 7-5 season in that type of scenario and look at it as things are still trending positively. The flip side to that is, if every one of those big games you're losing by 4 or 5 touchdowns, you're not even looking close to being competitive to those teams, and you're just beating the UConns, the Colgates, winning a couple home games against, Boston College and Duke, and you still get to 6-6, but you're not competitive in any of those upper echelon games, that I think could make some Syracuse fans go, is this really different? I still think for the most part, they'll still be on board with Fran. Like you said, he's a great ambassador. He has a great way of giving perspective on things. But Syracuse fans have also been conditioned for 25 plus years of every time there's a little glimpse of hope, it goes the exact opposite. So it'd be natural for some to kind of feel that that's happening again.
Mike, really enjoyed this conversation. We'll get you out of here on this one. Is there a guy on this team who, and you can't say quarterback because that's kind of cheating, if he plays up to his potential, or maybe he hits his ceiling, maybe he arrives a year earlier than I think you would project him to, hit his peak performance, that it really changes their fortunes this year? And if so, who is that guy?
You could point to a pass rusher. Perhaps it's a Dennis Jaquez, who I think is going to be stepping into a much larger role along the defensive line. But I'm going to kind of go a little bit outside the box, and I'm going to go a running back, Yassine Willis. If you've got a quarterback in transition, you've got an offensive line where you got a lot of new pieces, sometimes your best friend can be a strong running game. And that's going to be drastically different than what we saw last year under Syracuse if you have a running game as the focal point of your offense. But if Yassine Willis and even Will Nixon, who was LaQuinn Allen's backup until he got hurt last year, if the combination of those two guys can give Syracuse a stable running game, I think that can make a lot of things really work offensively. So you can do so many things off of that, take the pressure off of a new quarterback who is the guy for the first time in his college career. And that really could pace Syracuse and get to where they want to go next season.
Awesome, man. Mike, really enjoyed this thing. We'll have to chat again this time next year. Did a great job last year and followed it up, man. Enjoyed it.
Thanks, bud. Appreciate it.
All right, take care.